Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second in the series of CODART Conversations. It's been several months since we last gathered together a group of curators to discuss the current situation with COVID-19, during which museums have experienced, like the rest of the world, a lot of upheaval. I'm delighted to be joined today by four wonderful colleagues: Carina Fryklund from the National Museum in Stockholm, Dolores Delgado from the Thyssen in Madrid, Bart Cornelis from the National Gallery in London, and Anne van Oosterwijk from the Bruges Museums. And we're going to have, I hope, a wide-ranging and very stimulating conversation about our individual institutions' experiences of COVID, what has happened with the very ambitious exhibitions that were planned during this period, how we've navigated this climate, but also about the future, what we think will change, what we're doing right now to cope with the situation. And I want to begin just by speaking to each of you in turn and hearing a little bit about how you're doing, what your experiences have been. I thought I would start with Dolores, really by congratulating you. You had a wonderful exhibition on Rembrandt and Amsterdam portraiture that had just opened when the crisis hit. And I want to congratulate you on the wonderful virtual exhibition that you were able to put in place. I know I was very sad not to be able to travel to Madrid to see this show. And I hope maybe you can talk a little about the experience, both the positives and negatives.
Yes, well, positive, it was the exhibition opened on February on 17th, and it was only 1 month open when it was the lockdown because of the COVID crisis, and so it was, of course, a big shock for all of us. But what we did is what we all, all the institutions and all the museums and collectors of art have been doing during the lockdown. When it was everything closed, we used the digital and media tools, trying to keep the visitors, to keep the interest of the visitors in our great, not only in our exhibition, but also in the museum. And we were lucky because we managed, we contacted on all the loaners during the lockdown, and we managed to extend the exhibitions 3 months, and it ends finally instead of May, at the end of May, in August. So it at least it gave us the opportunity to reach a lot of people, and we finally had 90,000 visitors, and that's of course in that time, in this current times of pandemic, it's not so bad, and it's a huge amount of people, and it is like we got to people, not also some tourists. Not people were not only come to the exhibition in summer, not only from Spain, but also a few tourists and some foreign people had the opportunity to see the exhibition. But many others no, and we work also hard with those digital tools in order to put for everyone the virtual guide of the museum, and with the explanation and those. And I think that was a big point for us, and also for the people to have the opportunity, everyone everywhere, to see that in those circumstances. So it was at the first glance, it was a shock, and of course it was. But the positive things is that we made an intense work on that, and I think people was we had a big also amount of visits in the web. So I think people was really interested in and appreciate all that that big work.
I certainly appreciated it, speaking for myself. So thank you. And another institution that had big plans for this year were the museums in Bruges. This was the Van Eyck year with an exhibition that I know all my American colleagues were very much looking forward to seeing. So Anne, perhaps you could talk a little bit about how your institution has navigated this very challenging year, much different than we all anticipated.
Yeah, it was a strange year for us all, of course. The big exhibition in Ghent started early in February, the big exhibition about Jan van Eyck and the optical revolution. And in Bruges, we decided to make a smaller exhibition of only 2 galleries, which was focused on 2 of our master paintings that we have of Jan van Eyck. So it was really meant as an in-depth exhibition next to the big overview exhibition in Ghent. And I know of a lot of colleagues that they were all planning to make the combination to go to Ghent first and then travel back to Bruges to see both. We were open for only 1 day and then we were locking down. So it was really crazy. You're working to this big moment that your exhibition is opening. And we also combined it with a refurbishment of the galleries. So it was the combination of the whole museum and a new surroundings, new feeling. And then we had to close down, and that was strange, almost unsurreal. But we decided quite soon to have an extension of the exhibition and till the early September, and then later on it was actually the only place in Bruges, the Groningen Museum, that more or less had the same visitors as the year before.
Wow.
So all other locations that were suffering with a big visitors loss of only 40% during the summer months of the normal amount of visitors. So in Groningen Museum it was more or less the same, so we decided to prolong it another time, which was possible because we had local loans more or less for this exhibition. But of course the big exhibition in Ghent, which was the big headline of the year for I think the Low Countries, it had to close down and only 130,000 visitors saw it instead of the 300,000 that they expected. And yeah, it was a wonderful show. It's such a shame that a lot of people weren't able to see it.
Yeah, very, very disappointing. No way around that, I think.
Yes, yeah.
One show that I was delighted to actually be able to see was Bart's Nicolaas Maas exhibition at the National Gallery. Hard to believe that we were shaking hands and hugging at an opening dinner just in February. Bart, could you talk a little bit about the situation in the UK and particularly the furloughs that have been going on? And I know that we use the term furlough a little differently in the United States. When you're furloughed in the United States, you're not actually receiving any salary. But I think the situation in the UK is a little different.
Yes, yes, it is. Yes, no, we were in a similar situation with Nicolaas Maas, as you say. You were lucky to be there, and literally 3 weeks later, it had to close. It was actually a little bit later than in most of continental Europe, where museums had already started to close. But nevertheless, was a very short run initially, and like the others, we were able to extend the exhibition so that it only closed on the 20th of September now. And all lenders without exception have agreed to have the pictures there, so that was great. And in the end, it was well visited. The first 3 weeks were tremendously well visited, so it was a real shame that we could not extend that. That could have done really well, but in the end, it didn't do so well either. I mean, under the circumstances, as you say, furlough. So in the UK, that means essentially that people get compensated by the government for 80% of their salary. That is to say that the institutions that pay those salaries get compensated, and they can either top it up but the furlough also entails that people are actually no longer, by law, are no longer allowed to work. So you get your salary, but you actually disappear off the radar, as it were. That has been a bit challenging for people like myself who have not been furloughed, that you would, it was actually not really possible to contact colleagues in this country unless you did so by happen to have their mobile number, or because they're not even officially allowed to look at emails. And so it was a slightly peculiar situation in that sense. But of course, very much needed, because it meant that those people could retain their jobs, and that those institutions didn't suffer too much under the circumstances. But that is now coming to an end, this furlough scheme, and we don't know what will come in its place. But I think not necessarily the same scheme again, but something similar might be needed again in the coming months, seeing as things are going now. So that's the situation in the United Kingdom. The National Gallery was pretty much the only national museum not to furlough its staff, which is that did help to reopen the museum fairly quickly again. So we were the first to open in early July. And I suppose, I dare say, we wouldn't have been able to do that had everyone been furloughed. So I suppose, and there is an element of pride, perhaps, or at least encouragement to be had from the National Gallery reopening as soon as was possible. So that was, I think, the thinking about that, behind that.
Thank you. And now I'd like to turn to Carina in Stockholm. The Swedish exception or example has been the object of a lot of praise and also criticism in the international media, a lot of debate about the much looser measures, the much smaller shutdown, I guess I would say, I could characterize it. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you've experienced that in the museum world in Sweden.
Well, the museum closed down on the 20th of March, and we reopened on June 16th. And the majority of staff worked from home during that period. And we did have government institutions in this country cannot furlough staff. So we did have some layoffs, not many, but 2 staff members were laid off, which was a very unfortunate result of the current situation. But apart from that, we had the choice as individual staff members whether we wanted to travel to the office or work from home, and the majority of staff preferred to work from home. Personally, I have been going to the office every day during this whole period, and it's worked, reasonably well, I would say.
And has your visitorship been relatively normal since you reopened? What have the numbers been like?
Well, we've obviously over the summer, to begin with, over the summer we lost visitors, international foreign visitors to Stockholm. So we were down to 30% of normal visitor numbers at that point. And now about a third or half of the number of visitors that we would normally expect. But the positive news is that of the visitors that we do have, a larger portion decide to pay to see our temporary exhibitions. Mm-hmm. So the ticket sales are up. And from a normal of about 10% to, I believe, 30 to 40% ticket sales now.
Fantastic. And I think that will allow us to segue into talking about the different revenue models that museums have and how they've been faring during this crisis. There was an article in the New York Times yesterday about the drastic drops in visitorship in European museums, and that's something we're certainly seeing here in New York as well. Of course, there are many museums around the world that have free admission. I think that's the case for the permanent collections at the National Gallery and Stockholm also. So it is a different revenue model, and there's also different levels of government support. But I wonder if someone would like to speak to conversations that their institution is having about revenue, whether the revenue model needs to shift in light of these changed visitor numbers, whether you feel you're in a good situation.
Well, we will actually have a reasonably balanced budget for 2020. Partly that is due to added funding provided by the government for this year, which we were told of in September. So there was no bailout, but additional funding was provided eventually.
And Dolores, how is the situation for the Thyssen? Do you receive government funding? Are you reliant on exhibition revenue?
Oh yes, we are at Museo Nacional, and that means that also we receive funds from the government, and we have a budget for some years, and from now on we have no problem. But of course, because of the crisis and of the pandemic, we postpone all the internationals blockbusters exhibition like Calescats in June, and of course the Magritte one is postponed till next year because of course we are trying in this moment to do projects with low cost because of the uncertainty of these current times in the pandemic, and trying to avoid the crisis that it's going also to be a financial crisis also for everyone. And we are working on that kind of projects, trying to avoid costs, and we will have of course the meeting of our board of trustees with the government and so on. But from now we are working just like that, and as next year is we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Baron Thyssen birth. So we are organizing many events relating to commemorate that. So with the Thyssen collection from the family, and also with our collection. So it's not too expensive. I mean, and it is also very interesting, and it's a different way to show our collections and to understand better our institution, and it's also good for these times now. So.
Yeah, I've been hearing that from many colleagues, that there is a necessary shift to focusing on the permanent collection, to focus shows. I was struck on that you said in Bruges, you had already made the decision to have a focus on your permanent collection as part of the Van Eyck year, as opposed to the international blockbuster model in Ghent. Perhaps you could talk a little bit more about the rationale behind that and whether you think that will be your model moving forward.
Well, of course, because it was the Van Eyck year, we have two paintings that they belong to the core oeuvre of Van Eyck, and the canon of the Canon van der Palen painting, the version of the Canon van der Palen painting, of course, cannot travel. It is too fragile to be even, well, it cannot be moved out of the museum, let's say it that way. So it was we couldn't send it to Ghent. Also, although we wanted it, we couldn't send it, and that was the reason that we thought, well, this should be included in the Van Eyck year. It's such an important painting, and we have to do it by focusing on this specific painting. So it was a little bit about how it came into existence. So about more information about the patron. There was new research done by a colleague of ours of the city of the State Archives. And that was included, and of course also about Jan van Eyck living in Bruges, working in Bruges, what other kind of assignments he did. We did some technical research on the painting that we put forward to the public and gave a lot of information about. So it was really in depth. And besides that, if I can continue on your question about exhibition programs, we made quite a drastic change in our program for the next year, because we decided to focus this year, so 2020 and 2021, only on contemporary artists, local artists, Flemish artists and Belgian artists, because they are also struggling very much in these times. They don't have any possibilities to show their pieces anymore, to make new art. They don't have assignments anymore, and we really feel that's the base of what we're starting with from always. If no new art can be made, then what should museums do within that many centuries? So the project Mind the Artist will bring 7 artists in Bruges in our various exhibition halls, and will use the permanent collection to reflect on and give a new vision on. So that's what we are going to do in 2021 and 2021, and hopefully to support this important group of artists that are struggling so much now. So
yeah, that sounds like a wonderful project. And I know at the Met, we're very much recommitted in a way to our New York public, which is a very loyal public and now pretty much our only audience. And so we're thinking a lot about the city, the wonderful city of art and culture that we occupy, and that has gone through a very difficult 6 months. Bart, in London, I think of the National Gallery as one of the leading institutions for truly spectacular international loan shows. And I know that's also a key part of your revenue, of course, since you don't charge for admission to the permanent collection. So what does the near future look like for the National Gallery in terms of exhibition planning?
Well, we had to cancel a few shows just to make sure that in the short term we would regain some of that money you're losing. But as you say, indeed, we don't have any income from anyone visiting. You can just walk in after all. And that is to say, we have income from them, but only through secondary means, i.e. what they spend in the shop, what they buy, whether they go for lunch or things like that. And so that has clearly that is a large part of the revenue of the gallery, and that has gone away. And exhibitions were definitely a way of drawing in these large audiences that would also spend money. Of course, exhibition programs as such, even if they're so-called blockbusters, are not necessarily all that much of, on a yearly basis, an exhibition program may not actually make that much money. Because you may do a very expensive blockbuster type show, but also a smaller show that doesn't necessarily attract a huge audience. And on balance, that may just mean that the books might be sort of equal at the end of the year, rather than that you make a lot of money out of it. But it creates a lot of buzz and it creates footfall, essentially, which just generate money, and that was very important to us. How we going to? I mean, what is interesting is that the model that museums have been using over the years, organizing these large exhibitions, perhaps was coming under some stress anyhow, and this crisis has definitely put that into, gave that extra momentum, as it were, because now we all of a sudden had no choice but to think differently. It is something that we may have to. We were planning to think about it differently anyway. I think all of us really, of how long this could continue this way, and now we really have to come to some sort of new ideas as to how we do this. And in some ways, that might actually be an opportunity, because there had been a slight devaluation, if you want, in the concept of big shows. I mean, there were so many. I'm old enough, I'm afraid, to remember that it was a big thing when the Rijksmuseum had a Rembrandt exhibition in '92. I mean, that was huge, and that was something you would know 2 years in advance, and you would really anticipate going to that. And of course, there have been so many exhibitions concentrating on all these big names since that that perhaps we need to get away from that anyway, because it's interesting to me that this crisis has caused museums to reconsider their permanent collection. And you could, of course, ask yourself, why does it take a crisis like this or a pandemic like this to actually realize that you are sitting on this giant already, which is your permanent collection? I think it's a very healthy thing that we now are sort of forced to think about that again, and think of how we can attract audiences by not necessarily putting on another Light on Rembrandt or the Shadow of Vermeer exhibition, but something that is perhaps a little bit more imaginative. Nevertheless, I don't think they're going to go away, these large shows, necessarily, but there might be just fewer and further in between. But that is not necessarily a bad thing. I think large institutions may be in a better position to still continue with them, albeit even at a lower rate. It's going to, the sad thing, I think, of this pandemic especially is how badly it has hit smaller institutions that really have no way of coping, or in the worst case scenario wouldn't even be helped out by central government, and then are sort of left in the lurch. And this is a real problem, because I think our community of museums depends on all of us working together, and not just the big museums calling all the shots in a sort of Napoleonic fashion. So I think that is something that worries me a bit. But on the other hand, to focus on the permanent collection is not necessarily a bad thing. So while I don't necessarily regret if blockbusters become fewer, I think they're here to stay. And it's also the only model that we know in many ways. And it's we have these discussions. There are discussions like this happening. There's another one in 2 days' time, I believe, here from the Art Historians Association in this country, where and that is while we record this, obviously. So, but the where this is discussed again, it is more or less the only model we know, and it will be quite, takes some imagination now to think of other ways of generating the same interest and therefore money.
Absolutely. And I think we all are aware that the work of a curator is not just planning celebrated, splashy exhibitions, but it's the day-to-day tasks of cataloging, research, communication with the public. And maybe we can shift now to a discussion of what our day-to-day work looks like. Carina, was very envious to hear that you had access to your office all these months when I was dreaming of my library. But I was actually amazed to discover how ingenious I had to become in terms of using digital resources and digitized archives, and that I actually got a lot of work done when I wasn't running off to the airport every few weeks. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what your current work looks like in Stockholm.
Well, I just want to first connect a little bit to this idea of focusing on our permanent collections, which, as you know, here in Stockholm, we had a rare opportunity to do during the time of closure between 2013 and 18. And that has actually been the main draw of our museum the year that followed the reopening in October 2018. We had about over a million visitors in that first year. So obviously in comparison to that, we have a dramatic drop at this point. I just wanted to add that.
And are you finding that your work continues with cataloging the permanent collection, or are you looking ahead to exhibition projects?
We are actually continuing with international collaborative exhibition projects. So I'm personally now, which is a bit of a departure for me, I'm working on an exhibition together with my colleagues at the Louvre, which will be in the spring and fall of 2022 on the Libro, the Disegno Giorgio Vasari. So this is obviously also based on our two collections, since through Carl Gustaf Tessin we have a large number of sheets from the Vasari collection in Stockholm. So we pool our resources and we work together on that exhibition. And with the difficulties of traveling right now, obviously the collaboration is taking place as we speak here now by video conference. But that has turned out to work very well, I would say. And we also have an exhibition on the Swedish painter Anders Zorn, which it just opened in The Hague, I believe, in early October. And an exhibition made in collaboration with Statens Museum for Kunst in Copenhagen on the Danish Golden Age, which went up in Paris at the Petit Palais just recently also. So for us, it is really necessary to continue with these collaborative projects because we are a small museum and this is a way of being able to exchange results of research and reaching a wider audience.
And I think it is so true that we are reconsidering some of the protocols of curatorial work that whereas you might never consider asking for an international loan without traveling in person to have lunch or a coffee with your colleague, those things are happening over Zoom out of necessity. And I think as we consider not only this crisis, but also the ecological crisis, a lot of us are considering the environmental implications of big international exhibitions and the ethical stakes of them. One thing that we've had to accept, certainly at my institution, is works traveling without couriers in a moment of crisis when couriers can't cross international borders. And I wonder if any of you have had to have experiences with virtual installations or de-installations. Dolores, I see you're nodding.
Yeah. We are working with that. This installation, for example, of the Rembrandt exhibition was absolutely virtual, digital. It was the loaners were at their institutions and they were supervising and hanging and packing and everything, just with the PC or with the telephone and everything went really pretty well. Yeah, pretty well. And also we are doing couriers, virtual courier. For example, next week I have to do a courier for an exhibition on the Düsseldorf and the Kunstpalast Museum, and it will be also virtual and not the same. Yes, is of course, but it works. I mean, you see everything. And now with this technology, there is no problem because you can see the macro photographies. So I think it works. It works very well for us right now in this time. So that you are not going to travel, of course, and so it is.
No, and I think it also saves money. I mean, there's a lot of travel that doesn't have to be paid for. There's a lot of hotels that don't have to be paid for. And it's one of the few sides of this crisis that actually produces some money, if you want. But it's surprising in a way, I suppose, to all of us perhaps that how well it works and that it can be done. Not ideal, of course, but it is not impossible.
I wonder, though, if there's a danger, particularly as we have administrators who are trying to trim budgets and they see this works. And so the courier trip becomes a thing of the past. The loan negotiation trip becomes a thing of the past. Perhaps the research trip even becomes a thing of the past. And also for our audience, which, as we've seen, has not really returned in droves. They get used to experiencing art digitally. how do we make an argument for the tangible, in-person, concrete experience of the real work of art? Maybe we can begin by considering that question.
It's our experience that people are actually very charmed by being alone in the institutions, by walking alone in the galleries, by having the space, even a bench for your own to take the time to watch. And of course, we are very lucky. We were very lucky that we always have a large amount of tourists coming by without doing really specific things for those groups, even. But they were coming, but it also meant in the galleries that it was always a little bit busy. And it's small galleries. When you know the Groningen Museum, they're not big, the galleries. So it happened often that somebody was standing in front of the painting when you were looking, and now people really enjoy. There are only 45 people at the same time in the museum. That's the maximum amount that we are allowed to have. So that means that you're more or less always with the two of you or so in the gallery, and people really enjoy it. And it also adds a little bit to the discussion about the blockbusters, because maybe people who are often going to museums really start to see that these private tours, more or less, are really, really charming and really enjoyable, and that they maybe like our permanent collections therefore a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree absolutely with you. Yeah.
You know, the National Gallery has never looked so good. You know, in any way.
Yes. Yeah, I can see what you mean. Yeah.
It is an absolute delight now to walk through these rooms. At the same time, a bit sad because, you know, it is really not that many people that are there. But this experience in itself is amazing. I think one thing that cannot be replaced in all of this is that, you know, I don't know how you feel about this, but, you know, for me, seeing a work of art in the flesh always is an almost visceral experience. You know, it's something that actually it's almost like magic. You feel that you are in the presence of something, you know,
of course,
by this or that artist. It's something that cannot be replicated, or only with great difficulty, I think, in any kind of documentary or online or things like that. So I think that is something that people will come back to. And in fact, what they enjoy at the moment when they are allowed to be in that room with Rembrandt or Van Eyck or whoever, all by themselves, but it is also, again, I think we have learned to, through this pandemic, to see that this is a quality that we were sorely missing. And I think that can, again, I mean, I'm trying to look on the positive side, but, because they are there too. And I think they make us realize a few things that we perhaps took for granted before.
Yeah, I actually think that the audience is hungry for those experiences.
Yeah.
And we see in Stockholm that they are, little by little, they are returning. And the 70-plus crowd as well, who have been very careful about visiting interior spaces. So we are getting this group back to the museum now, and little by little, I think that's happening.
Yeah.
Great.
Good things. Sorry.
Go ahead.
The good thing about visiting a museum is that it is safe. I mean, even we start to use again our touch screens and our audio guides. We didn't use them for a while, but now we know that it's possible to at the guards let them clean quite often, and it works. And because you have those space, you have the gallery for your own. You know it's safe. You know it's not a problem to use, and it's different. For example, theaters or something, where you still, of course, they still want to have as much visitors as is sanitarily wise possible. And for the museum, you just have the space to yourself. You feel safe, and it makes a big difference. I think we still have a big chance to be the nice day out, to go out to somewhere and see things in this crisis. So,
yeah, I think that's a really positive and optimistic note for us to end on. That as difficult as this crisis has been, it's been a reminder of the role that museums can play, the refuge, to use a cliche, that they can provide for their audiences. And I think even as we move back to some semblance of normalcy, we'll all be thinking about how we can preserve some of that appreciation that we've regained for our permanent collections and for the service that we provide to our local communities. So with that, I'd like to thank you all so much for joining me for this conversation. I found it really enriching, and it's wonderful even when I can't cross the ocean to be able to connect with all of my international colleagues in this way. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you as well.
It was a pleasure for me too. Okay. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you.
Great to
Bye-bye.
see you. Bye.
Bye-bye.